Bonjour, bienvenue au Pôle Nord. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce John Gallacher, who is a professor of psychiatry at Oxford University. He's been the PI of the big cohort study known all over the world, the K-Phila study, so well known that I cannot pronounce it. But recently, 4 or 5 years ago, he's been the director of the Dementias UK platform, and he's going to talk to us about it.
Well, it's very kind of you to come and listen to me. I hope you'll find it interesting. If I go too fast for you, please just invite me to slow down and speak more and speak more clearly. That's fine. That's fine. It's a great pleasure for me to be here for several reasons. If I was speaking scientifically, I consider Bordeaux to be the epicenter of French epidemiology. And I congratulate you. Seriously, this is not flattery. Here are based, I think, some of, if not, the best French epidemiologic studies. And I just think it's, yes, no, seriously. And I think you deserve congratulations. I think the thoughtfulness, the farsightedness, the persistence of your faculty has shown great fruits, and it was a great pleasure for me last night to have an excellent dinner, I must say. I would be very embarrassed to try and return the compliment in the UK, because I would fail miserably.
We bring the food.
If you bring the food, yeah. But it was good to meet Jean-Francois from the PACID study and Christophe Studio from the 3C study, as well as obviously Geneviève and Carol from Memento. And that's just fantastic, and so I consider myself to be amongst experts here, and I will have to talk accordingly. So I'm going to talk about the Dementias Platform UK. The Dementias Platform UK is, I must also say, it's really good to see Vincent here again, who I meet in the Roadmap Consortium. I'm going to talk about the Dementias Platform UK, but I'm going to put it in a broader context of where epidemiology might be going. And I appreciate that there's always an ongoing debate amongst reflective epidemiologists as to the direction of the discipline. So I in no way claim to speak for anybody else but myself, and I'm sure I have a minority view. But nevertheless, it's my opportunity to tell you how my thinking is going. And I would appreciate your thoughts and your comments to correct me and guide me better as the thoughts progress. There's a story about a firm that was had recently built a new way of rebuilt itself in terms of manufacturing drills. And then another firm came along, a very, very big continental European firm, and completely underpriced them. They had a much more efficient way of developing drills. These are metal drill bits for wood, metal, etc., etc. And so the British company invited some management consultants to come in and evaluate what they should do, because they were no longer competitive. So the management consultants came in for about 2 weeks. They talked to everybody, and as management consultants do. And at the end of the 2 weeks, they presented to the board. And this bill was for something like £90,000 for 2 weeks' work. And the chairman of the management consultancy said, well, I'm going to show you 3 slides. 3 slides. And you can imagine the drill making company thinking, these slides are costing us £30,000 each. They better be good. They better be good. Well, here is the first slide. Okay, you told us you make drills. And here is the second slide. You don't. And here is the third slide. You make holes. And what the company was doing was saying, focus on what is the real issue. And the issue is not your technology that you currently use in building a drill. The issue is the technology that you might use in making a hole. And I think we really have to think very seriously about the future of our discipline. And I say that as somebody who loves it, who thinks it's extraordinarily valuable, and that the investments into it can only benefit in multiple ways and beyond the value of the investment, our society. But nevertheless, we have to think about what we're doing. Because the scientific challenge that we live in is that, in fact, the next generation science, I think, will have roughly 3 features to it. It will be more complex. And because it's more complex, there will be more focused questions. The answers will be technology-led. And there will be increasing interdependence between disciplines. I think there will continue to be downward cost pressures. So we will require to be delivering more efficient solutions. There will be more rapid knowledge sharing and, curiously, increased risk sharing, because individual stakeholders can no longer sustain the risk of failure themselves. They have to share the risk. We have to share the risk as a community. And it will be increasingly social capital based, in the sense that we will all want to do jobs that we find intrinsically satisfying. And may wish to improve the way that we have career structures and incentives, so that we do incentivize analysts, we do incentivize data collectors, and we do incentivize infrastructure supporters, so that the provenance of a paper is not just based on the intellectual ability of the people writing it, the author list. Actually, increasingly, the provenance of a scientific finding will be based on the quality of the entire infrastructure. And I just think we need to acknowledge that in the way that we do and promote science. Let's look at the precision medicine challenge. So this is a slide from the Nuffield Department of Population Health. It's an absolutely great slide. I use it all the time, but I can take no credit for it. Is that okay? Let's be very clear on that. I can take no credit for it. Here are results looking at blood pressure and IHD mortality in 5,000 people. And as you can see, if you break it down by age group, it's very hard to, it's like knitting. It's very hard to disentangle what's going on there. If we were to increase this cohort size to 50,000 people, and Professor Rory Collins has a very good way of saying the 5,000 people you could call a Framingham unit, and the 50,000 people you could call a Dole unit. So these are cohorts in Framingham and Dole units. Again, you can see something, but you'd be very loath to say that we understand fully the relationship. If we go to a cohort of 500,000 people, then actually the relationships become very clear. They're log linear. And within the range of exposure and within the range of blood pressure, it's a log linear association. And to some extent, you do not need to repeat that within that population. That is the relationship. And we can go on to other questions. I think increasingly we will be required to be delivering answers of that certainty. It may not be necessarily that magnitude, that will vary according to the question, but the level of certainty that will be required and expected will be greater than we can currently deliver. And the really elegant thing about this diagram is that each of these subsets are random samples of the other, so it is purely a statistical power issue. So let's look at the experimental medicine challenge, and I'm using dementia as an example here. Currently, dementia studies, dementia experimental medicine studies or trials are typically conducted in the space occupied by the red slope. So what happens is you go to your spouse takes you to the specialist and you are told that, well, I'm sorry, John, but I'm afraid and you have mild cognitive impairment, and would you be willing to take part in a clinical trial? And you probably say yes, and you get recruited to a clinical trial. And over the last 15 years, all the trials have failed. So we do not have one new treatment coming to market over the last 15 years. And, and there are several reasons for this, but one of the reasons is that the opportunity for recovery or for if you like, impact is very reduced, because by the time you get to that stage, your brain has deteriorated very much. What we would much rather do is conduct experimental medicine, and I'll define that term more closely in a moment. We'd much rather conduct experimental medicine where the green slope is. Now, the trouble with the green slope is it's much flatter, and so it's much harder to detect change. And the only way to really do that is either to have massive studies, which are prohibitively expensive, or to have very highly targeted studies where you're looking at very specific mechanisms in very specific individuals, highly genotyped or highly phenotyped, highly characterized individuals. Now, a further problem of this, of course, and we may come on to this later, is that the people in this green slope space don't really know they are at risk. And if I was to invite you to take part in an experimental medicine study for dementia, you might say, yeah, that's fantastic. Why me? And I might say, well, it's because you're at high risk of dementia. And you say, well, I didn't know that. And I've ruined your whole day. Okay. So we need to find ways, and this is a social conversation, a consensus has to be achieved, where we are able to do studies that do bring interventions to the marketplace effectively, that will delay onset and slow progression at an early stage rather than when it's more or less too late. And these are very difficult challenges, very difficult challenges. And by experimental medicine, it's not just a matter of doing what you might call an early phase trial, because typically a trial is designed so that if it fails, it fails. But by experimental medicine, what I mean is if it fails, we have sufficient information to know why it's failed. Where did the molecule not engage? Where did the intervention not work? In which groups did it not work? If we did this again, how would we do it differently? And I think that becomes much more informative than just a straightforward early phase trial. So you might think, what would be next generation cohorts? Well, I think that the trends as I've described them of constrained funding, more targeted questions and greater added value, I think that's fairly predictable. What would our response be? Well, perhaps we might like to employ more cost-efficient technologies. We might like to have more purposive designs, and I will come on to these. And we might like to adopt a science for everyone. Really, science is a social issue. It's not just a matter for scientists to go and do their thing and publish their paper. It's a matter for us to engage society. We are all part of this great enterprise. And whether that's contributing our routinely collected data, taking part in trials, it's something that we all should be involved in. And I think it wouldn't be a hard sell to the wider public to say, come and join us. Let's all do this together. So let's make a distinction between what I would argue as etiological and public health trials. Let's suggest that for the sake of being more cost effective, we would want to put the infrastructure for these trials within platforms. Let's think that we would like to collect data far more cost effectively and far more granular, and that effectively boils down to digital platforms. And we would like to collate all the outcomes in a very cost efficient way, and that effectively means I'm coming on to centralized linkage, and perhaps remote bias sampling. And perhaps you would like to put all these measurements within a broader social context of existing infrastructure. I mean, it is not cost efficient to be setting up separate clinics for separate studies for very labor intensive measurements. It's what we've had to do, and to have done it in the past for the questions we've asked has been entirely legitimate. But as you're thinking ahead to cohorts of 100,000 or cohorts of 500,000, these methods do not work, and we need to be thinking of new methods. So let me make a distinction, and here is where we can have lots of wonderful disagreement about this. But effectively, you could argue that an etiological cohort is one for detecting small effects. And in order to have the power to detect small effects, it has to be big. It really has to be big. Not just small effects in terms of small exposures, but rare outcomes as well. It has to be big. And what you require for that are heterogeneous. You need a wide range of exposure in order to be able to detect effect. You don't necessarily need for that sample to be representative. However, if you are doing a public health study where you are interested very, very clearly in the prevalence of a condition, in the incidence of a condition, in the risk factor profile of a particular population, then you do need to have representative sampling. And although historically we have tried to combine both designs, both purposes into the same design, I don't think moving forward it will work. It really won't. And I'd love somebody to show me one example where it has. But there's a third option, which we were discussing over dinner, which I really find very exciting, which is the living laboratories option, where effectively you're testing what I would argue are realistically complex hypotheses. It's not just a matter of the genotype, it's not just a matter of the healthcare, it's actually a matter of the environment. And it's not just a matter of the environment, it's the matter of the family history. And to bring all of these things together means that you take a place like Bordeaux, and you say, okay, we're going to study Bordeaux like no one has ever studied a city before. We're going to make this the most interesting, the most informed place, and we're going to apply those findings to specific public health solutions within this city. I think that would be so exciting. Now, here's the interesting thing, and the reason why I mention it is over dinner last night, it was very clear that actually you're halfway there. And if there were any places that I'm aware of that could do this, and you're also thinking, I was talking to Geneviève, and she's thinking about these things. These are her thoughts, and it would be just so exciting for you to think, okay, how can we integrate healthcare, the biosamples? How can we remotely get genetics? How can we look at the environmental exposures, and how can we structure these things so we can put all these data together to really test these hypotheses? And I just think it's a fantastic opportunity. So there we are. I think these are directions that will happen. So within that context, what does the Dementias Platform do? The Dementias Platform tries to take a step in this direction by providing, if you like, a central resource for people to come and use. Effectively, it has three main applications or utilities: rapid data access, recruitment to trials, and resourcing multi-center studies. Let's go through each of, and within the UK landscape, it sits there in the middle. That's the dreaded pink colour. It sits there in the middle, and so there's been quite a bit of investment in the UK. But we sit between the basic biological discovery of the Dementia Research Institute and, if you like, trials conducted by various trials networks funded by the NIHR. So we'd like to, if you like, provide the bridge between the basic science. We facilitate the experimental medicine, and then others go on to do the trials. To build a collaboration like this, you have to be very careful, because what you're trying to do is to help everyone. And so we're quite clear on our values. So our values are that we want to be, we intend to be, we try to be. If we fail, you need to tell us. But we intend to be an intellectually generous community. We'd just like to do that. We'd like to be a collaborative community. We'd like to invite all of our stakeholders to shape our activity. And we'd like to be a creative community. What are the new ways of thinking? What are the new ways of working that we can do to improve our discipline? And we'd like to enable others to do the work. So if you get a grant in collaboration with Deep UK, it's not a Deep UK grant, it's your grant. All we've done is help you get it. And we're really, really comfortable with that. So our overview is effectively we have a core infrastructure. We use that core infrastructure to gather self-organizing science communities. So for example, let's just say for argument's sake that you were a community of molecular imagers. Well, what would I know as an epidemiologist about how best to organize yourselves? I don't know, but you do know. So what I would like to do is give you the freedom and the opportunity to think about what is the best way of organising ourselves, to understand the questions we need to ask, to understand how we might arrive at the solutions, to standardise our practice, etc., etc. And then from these self-organising communities, we would pay for them to organise and to meet, but there's no such thing as a free meal. And so what we would then do is say, if we pay for you to meet, after a year, you must come up with a strategic research grant. Okay, so it might cost us, I'm just picking numbers here, £10,000 to fund their meetings over the course of a year. But at the end of that year, they should be applying for £1 million worth of research infrastructure or investment or project. And because we provide the infrastructure backing, those grants tend to be very competitive. That means that we get good return on our investment. So there is a very clear strategy. And because the scientific activity is distributed, they're not DPUK grants. The credit goes to the institutions, it goes to the scientists, not to DPUK. There's a further incentive that we would like to give to help people do more and better dementia research. So that's our basic strategy. If we look at rapid data access, data sets are becoming increasingly large, increasingly complex, and increasingly sensitive. It really is not a sensible way forward to be distributing these data sets, even if you were allowed to all over the planet. You won't be allowed to, effectively. So in order to get access to data sets, we need to bring them to central places which are known to be secure, are known to be robust, and are known to be persistent. Okay? And that means effectively data repositories. So what we've done is we've built one, and I'm sure there are other ways and maybe even better ways of doing it, but we have built one. And in this repository, effectively, cohorts place their data into a controlled and secure space. They remain the data controllers. DPUK owns no data, absolutely none. We really don't want to own anything. The cohort research team owns the data. And with their approval, we will move it into an analytic space on a project by project basis. It's as simple as that. So let's say that you wanted to use data from 4 or 5 of our cohorts. You would make a single application. We would then relate that application to the data owners, to the cohort PIs, and if they gave approval, we would then make the data that you've requested available to those people in a separate space for them to analyze. And not only do they analyze it, but if they cannot remove it, and we are completely aware of everything that they do, so they cannot misuse it. And then if the cohort PI wishes to remove the data, they just write us a letter with a wet signature, and then the data are removed from the portal. So what we're trying to do is to provide an environment which gives confidence to the data owners to be able to share their data. So that's our model. And of course, although you can't remove the data, you can remove reports for publication purposes. So when we began, we had a lot of case-rich population cohorts. These are mature, effectively repurposed cardiovascular cohorts, largely. We also had some prodromal population cohorts, so these are, if you like, slightly bigger cohorts started more recently, and a fair number of genetic at-risk cohorts. And these cohorts are very diverse. All this diagram shows is the number, the grey spot is at inception, and the red spots are repeat assessments. So it just shows you that these are a very diverse range of information available in the cohorts. And this is where we're up to so far. We have data uploaded in progress for 17 cohorts. We have data available per study for 4 others. And we have the legals completed for a further 11 and discussions underway for a further 20. Now, I have to say, this is an extremely complicated process. It sounds great as a headline aim, but it's extremely complicated. And so the data upload process is definitely something which will be ongoing for years to come, because it's not just a matter of receiving the data, it's a matter of making sense of it, ordering it, standardizing it, simplifying it, so that when analysts come to access it, they actually can do so in a convenient and cost-effective manner. In terms of our technology networks, we have 3 networks. We have a PET MR, molecular structural imaging network, with 7 machines on 7 sites which are working to standardize their protocols, their governance and procedures, so that we can do multi-center studies easily. We have an induced pluripotent stem cell network, again, so that we can do disease modeling in the sense of the cellular impacts of compounds and according to genotype, according to, if you like, history as well. And we have immortalized at least 1 cohort, cells from at least 1 cohort for that purpose. And we have a bioinformatics network where we're looking at how do we integrate data from wearables, how do we integrate data from EHRs and from cohorts and genetics and imaging in a way that makes it accessible to analysts. In terms of research activity, over the last, I suppose it's coming up to 4 years now, we had a core funding of about £16 million, and that was 12 from MRC and 4 from industry, because we are a public-private partnership. And what we've done is been able to leverage money for other studies. Now, what I'm not claiming is without DPUK, these studies would not have happened. Okay, that would just be wholly incorrect. But what I am saying is what we've done is influence how the money was spent. What was the opportunities? We have made these proposals more competitive. And I think that if you just look at that, if we exclude the DPUK funded projects, where we have directly funded projects, we've been able to go from 60 million, and we've leveraged and influenced and benefited people to gain a further 100 million pounds over the last 4 years. Now I hope that's quite acceptable, you know. So there we are. So I think we are on the right track. If we just look at our impact summary over the last 4 years, we have 52 cohorts that either are uploading data or in discussions. In principle, they're willing to share their data. We have 11 academic partners and 7 industry partners, and we've enabled a large amount of funding. Also, interestingly, the idea seems to be catching on, and I was in South Korea about 2-3 weeks ago, and they have just launched a South Korean Dementias platform, and effectively it's based on our model. We are entering into a completely equal partnership of how can we mutually make this improve and develop it for general benefit. So I'm very pleased about that, and we have other discussions that are ongoing. Okay, so where do we go from here? So I'm in the process of, along with my executive, developing a renewal proposal that has been invited by the Medical Research Council. We will again focus on the 3 things of the data portal. In terms of rapid data access, we'd like to develop to enhance data captures, that we provide some sort of cohort support, and effectively develop the interoperable network. I think we also want to go to develop a clinical studies pipeline. We've discovered that recruiting directly to clinical studies, if you like, experimental medicine that I described earlier, is not efficient if you do it from cohorts. And I think that's understandable. I think cohorts are very careful about how they manage this precious resource, which is their population sample. And so when you put a proposal to a cohort, one, you don't know whether they're going to say yes or no, but 2, and perhaps more importantly, you don't know when they're going to say yes or no. And on that basis, you just can't build a resource. So our idea now is to take a step back and to invite cohort members to join a register where effectively you can manage that register independently of the cohort. Now, there are some cohorts which you would just not do this. For example, if you have a familial disease cohort, it's very small. Inviting people to join a register compromises the scientific purpose of the cohort, so you wouldn't do it. But if you had a cohort that was 100,000 strong, then actually to recruit 50 people or 100 people to an experimental medicine study really is not going to have any effect on the risk estimates derived from that cohort, even if the intervention works. and obviously the possibility is that it won't. So we think that is a reasonable conversation to have with cohort PIs. And where the grey areas are, we don't know. We're engaging this conversation now. But one of the beauties of running a register is that you separate out, you decouple the principle of recontact from the practice. So if I said to you, would you like to join a register? And you said, well, yes, of course. And I said, but by the way, if you get approached to do a study that may involve disclosure of your dementia risk, is that acceptable? Now, if you say no, then you're not eligible to join the register, okay? But if you say yes, then you are eligible to join the register, and then it's not a big surprise to you or a big shock to your system if somebody comes up to you, would you like to join our study? And you say, yes, of course, why me? Well, you are at increased risk from Alzheimer's disease. So you're uncoupling the principle from the practice. And I think that's a very important issue. Also, you're managing a depletable resource. These individuals, highly characterized over decades, are highly valuable. You don't sort of waste them on studies that, if you like, less characterized individuals could be engaged in. So you really want to only contact them when when they are critical to the hypothesis being tested. And of course, that provides lead-in data, and it's a very cost-effective way of doing it. And then we would obviously like to develop what we would call an experimental medicine incubator role. One of the interesting things about the Dementias platform is that it seems to work very well as an honest broker third party, so that we're in a position to bring together collaborators and help people to forge coalitions that they would not otherwise forge. This is particularly true between academics and industry, but it's also true between industry itself and between academics, because we are a neutral area. We don't come into the conversation with any other motive other than helping the conversation. And I think that has shown to be very, very interesting. We like to help define pre-competitive space, and the pre-competitive space typically is how can we develop a solution, and then we're going to leave it to you guys to market that solution once we've developed it. But the critical thing for us is that the solution is developed, because that's really what drives potential benefit. And then we can provide some small amount of catalytic funding. So if we think this is a good idea, if we'll put a bit of money in, will you put a lot of money in? And that's effectively how we approach people with a lot of money. So that's what we do. So as we move forward, we are looking to have centralized access for electronic health records to all Deep UK cohorts. I think the UK system currently is not efficient, and there are many ways of increasing the efficiency, so that would be one of the things we do. We are looking to develop this global network so that we have fully interoperable data repositories. We will be developing this clinical studies register so that we can develop the recontact process. And we'll be looking to develop our multi-center experimental studies incubator by bringing together match funding expertise, as I described previously. And opportunities for collaboration. We're looking for people who share the vision. You know, and the vision really is we want to improve the rigor, the quality, and the availability of dementia research and dementia findings. And we're very happy. We know our core values are we want to be generous about this, we want to be collaborative about this. And so we're looking for people who have that same ethos and who would join us in developing, you know, digital phenotyping, metadata research tools, innovative analytics, you know, centralized linkage, the governance thereof, because the governance typically applies across jurisdictions, even if particular solutions only actually work within jurisdictions. And of course, developing, you know, if you like, a plethora of experimental studies, so that when a molecule comes to a phase 3 trial, actually it is extremely unlikely to fail, and therefore people will invest in the development, and we will bring medicines to the public more quickly. So these are our collaborators. It's been a fantastic collaboration. I think we've come together as academics and industry in good faith. I think we've been very open to one another, and I've enjoyed it immensely, I have to say. And thank you very much.